At the end of the 2012-2013 campaign, 1 month after leading Manchester United to their historic 20th league title, Sir Alex Ferguson announced that he was going to leave the club in the summer to retire, walking out at Old Trafford for his final game. 1,500 games, 26 years, 38 trophies, countless unforgettable nights. He left behind not just a football club, but an institution that had grown used to winning, a fan base that had grown up on dominance, and a legacy that transcended the sport. What came next was something no one at Old Trafford truly anticipated. The succession plan failed. The aura evaporated. The most successful club in English football history had found itself lost in the modern game. They've searched for identity, for leadership, for the winning edge that once seemed inevitable. Instead came false dawns, quick fixes, and long stretches of mediocrity. Some kind of drop-off from the Ferguson era was to be expected, but you'd struggle to find football fans that truly thought 12 seasons on, Manchester United would be in the position that they are now, both on and off the pitch. So how did Manchester United go from Ferguson's all-conquering juggernaut to a team struggling to find its place in English football's new order? From a club that struck fear in every corner of the globe, to a company laying staff off in every department. Chelsea fans often joke that their number 9 shirt is cursed, but at Old Trafford, it's the manager's seat that carries the real curse. And it all began with the man chosen to carry Ferguson's torch, one David Moyes. Alex Ferguson personally handpicked David Moyes as his successor, and on paper, it made a lot of sense. A fellow Scot, respected across the league for his work at Everton, loyal, hard-working, and pragmatic. He was the safe choice. Unfortunately for Manchester United, football rarely rewards safety. Moyes built his reputation on structure and discipline, a manager who valued shape and graft over flair. At Everton, that worked. He thrived on making his teams organised, defensively resilient, and difficult to beat. But Manchester United was different. It demanded risk, swagger, and control. The job needed someone who could manage superstars and carry the weight of expectation. Moyes' approach, cautious and conservative, looked out of place from the very start. Following Ferguson's departure back in 2013, the Glazers appointed Ed Woodward to the role of executive vice chairman of the board, giving him control of transfers and effectively running of the club. Woodward had a good relationship with the Glazers, having advised the brothers during their takeover of the club back in 2005, and was then later recruited to join the club in a financial planning role. During his time at United, Woodward cut a divisive figure to say the least. With his role giving him control of transfers, a lot of the blame regarding United's success in the transfer markets fell upon his shoulders. He was either not ambitious enough with certain deals, or overspent and gave ridiculous contracts to pass their prime players. The summer transfer window proved difficult. United's pursuit of Thiago, Fabregas and Bale all ended in failure. Instead, Woodward and Moyes settled for a last-minute deal for Marouane Fellaini, a player Moyes knew well but who never truly looked the part. It was a move that came to symbolise his short reign, awkward and uninspired. January bought Juan Mata from Chelsea, a talented signing no doubt, but one that arrived too late to change the course of the season. From the very first weeks of the 2013-14 season, something felt off. The sharp edge that had defined United under Ferguson was gone. The fear factor evaporated almost overnight. United's first league defeat came at Anfield, followed not long after by a humbling 4-1 loss at the Etihad. At Old Trafford, teams that hadn't won there in decades began to believe they could. West Brom, Newcastle and Sunderland all left Manchester with victories. The aura was gone and the theatre of dreams began to feel ordinary. By the end of December, United sat in 6th. Following on from back-to-back home defeats to Everton and Newcastle, Moyes boldly stated United needed to improve in a number of areas, including passing, creating chances, and defending. Paul Scholes had retired for a second and final time that summer, and his absence was felt throughout the season. United's midfield looked slow, uncertain, and disconnected. The passing rhythm that had been second nature for years was gone. That issue was never clearer than in the infamous home draw against Fulham, where United attempted an astonishing 81 crosses after failing to win in the middle of the park. It was a display that felt desperate, a team stuck between eras, clinging to habits that no longer worked. There were few moments to savour. The Champions League round of 16 comeback against Olympiacos was one of them. Old Trafford did roar again that night as Robin van Persie's hat-trick overturned a 2-goal deficit from the first leg. For 90 minutes, it did feel like the old United, but it was just for those 90 minutes. They bowed out only 3 weeks later to Bayern Munich. Back in the league, the problems deepened. United were predictable in attack, fragile in defence, and lifeless in midfield. The veterans that Ferguson had squeezed every last drop out of, Vidic, Ferdinand, Evra, Carrick, looked spent. Players like Kagawa and Chicharito, who had been useful weapons under Ferguson, were completely sidelined. The dressing room no longer believed. The supporters no longer feared the worst. They expected it. By April, Moyes' position had become untenable. Successive 3-0 defeats at home to Liverpool and Manchester City sealed his fate. 10 months after being given a 6-year contract, he was gone. The hand-picked heir to Ferguson's empire, undone by the weight of expectation. None other than Ryan Giggs stepped in as caretaker for the final games, offering some resurgence. 4-0 wins over Newcastle and Norwich, sandwiched around defeats to Everton and Sunderland, felt like patchwork on a season defined by systemic failure. On the final day, a draw against Southampton confirmed what no one wanted to see. No European football next season. The Moyes experiment had been a failure, but more than that, it shattered the illusion that Manchester United were immune to decline. For the first time in a generation, they looked human. The fortress had crumbled, the fear had faded, and the club that once stood atop the hill of English football had tumbled down it. Following on from the dismal 13-14 season, United now had some tough choices to make. Who could they choose to now lead them? Mourinho, who had been a key target for years, was back at Chelsea. United's heads then turned to other available options. Among the choices at the time were Borussia Dortmund's Jurgen Klopp, PSG's Laurent Blanc, and Real Madrid's Carlo Ancelotti. All three may have been very different stylistically, but there was one thing certain: they were proven winners, something United desperately needed. United instead chose to opt for Netherlands coach Louis van Gaal. As the Dutchman arrived, there was a feeling of cautious optimism. The club had been burned by the chaos of the previous year, but Van Gaal's reputation carried weight. A serial winner with Barcelona, Ajax, and Bayern Munich, a tactician who had just led the Netherlands to a World Cup semi-final. In many ways, he was the antithesis of David Moyes. Where Moyes was overwhelmed by the job, Van Gaal carried himself as though he was doing the club a favour by taking it. And his style was different too. Van Gaal wanted control, possession, structure. The days of Moyes' instability was gone, replaced by meticulous systems and endless passing sequences. Van Gaal believed that with enough repetition, football could become predictable, controllable, almost mathematical. In theory, it made sense. In practice, it drained the life out of a team built on instinct. That summer marked the true end of the Ferguson era. Rio Ferdinand, Nemanja Vidic, and Patrice Evra all left. Ryan Giggs finally hung up his boots and became Van Gaal's assistant. Javier Hernandez, Nani, Cleverley, Welbeck, Fletcher, Anderson, all gone. In their place came Luke Shaw, Ander Herrera, Marcus Rojo, Daley Blind, Angel Di Maria, and Radamel Falcao. It was a total rebuild. But delving deeper, question marks emerged. United had lost players in key areas, and the replacements they had brought in felt directionless. Herrera, Rojo, and Blind were all players who, while solid squad players, did not seem to be players that would lead United into a new era. Di Maria, on the other hand, was a player in the prime of his career, having scored 11 times and assisted 26 the previous season. This was a move that gave United a bit of star power that they desperately needed. Then there was Radamel Falcao. Falcao was an odd signing. Nobody doubted his goal-scoring ability, but the Colombian was approaching 30 and coming off an injury-ridden campaign with Monaco. It felt desperate. United still had Van Persie too, who was showing signs of decline himself. For Van Gaal's first summer window, it didn't feel like a step in the direction United needed to go. It did feel mostly too safe, too sterile. August and September went horribly. United's first league games saw them go up against Swansea, Sunderland, Burnley, QPR, and Leicester. All three promoted teams the season before. 5 games and only 5 points. And amidst those results came the League Cup game against League One side MK Dons. A humbling 4-0 defeat, with youngster Dele Alli running the show, and a brace by former Arsenal man Benik Afobe. The football was meticulous, yet somehow chaotic at the same time. Van Gaal persisted with the back three, moving players into awkward roles and calling up youngsters from nowhere. Paddy McNair, Tyler Blackett, Tom Thorpe, James Wilson, none were ready. The constant changes only deepened the confusion. For a brief moment, however, it looked like it might work. After 2 late-minute equalisers against West Brom and Chelsea, United went on a 10-match unbeaten run going into 2015, picking up results against Arsenal, Liverpool, Newcastle and Tottenham. Di Maria started brightly, scoring and assisting freely, but his form collapsed after injuries and a home robbery. Van Gaal began using him in central midfield, even up front, and the confidence drained from him. And by the end of the season, he looked like a player counting down the days until he leave. There were reminders of what United could be, but too often they reverted to slow, predictable football. Long spells of possession with no purpose. Endless passes between the fullbacks and midfielders. United averaged over 60% possession that season, but few could remember what they actually did with it. It was control for control's sake. Van Gaal's United finished 4th, a modest success after the chaos of Moyes, but the mood around the club was uneasy. This was the first season United had failed to pick up a trophy since 2005. The players looked deflated, the fans were unconvinced, a sense of identity, of joy, still felt distant. The second season began with more change. Di Maria left after a single year, despised by fans who saw him give up. Alongside him, Robin van Persie, Hernandez, Johnny Evans, Nani all departed Old Trafford. In their wake, Bastian Schweinsteiger and Morgan Schneiderlin arrived to add steel in midfield. Memphis Depay was added for excitement, Matteo Darmian for solidity. Anthony Martial was a last-minute arrival, an unknown teenager from Monaco, and now the most expensive one in history. Van Gaal's control obsession deepened. United dominated the ball, but rarely attacked with conviction. There was a 0-0 draw with Middlesbrough in the League Cup that felt like a warning sign, and defeats in the Champions League group stage confirmed it. They dropped into the Europa League, where football became an endurance test. There were games where United managed only a single shot on target, despite having 70% of the ball. It was football as paperwork. The club's league campaign was anything but consistent. Only once all season did United manage 5 games in a row without defeat. They also managed 3 wins in a row only once, way back in September. Van Gaal wanted order and routine, but the results did not follow suit. Individual brilliance did give the fans some moments to celebrate. Martial's debut goal against Liverpool, a solo run that electrified Old Trafford, Rashford's breakthrough in Europe, and then Arsenal too. The teenager's fearlessness reignited something in the stands, a flicker of the old United spirit. But it felt like those moments came in spite of the system, not because of it. Van Gaal was losing the players. Bastian Schweinsteiger was spending more time travelling to watch his wife play tennis than featuring on the pitch. Falcao was barely fit, and Bruni's legs were frankly gone. The atmosphere turned heavy. Every week brought the same patterns, the same aimless possession, the same frustration. There were some strange moments too, the kind only Van Gaal could provide. He once printed out long ball statistics to prove Sam Allardyce wrong. He referred to Chris Smalling as Mike twice. He could be brilliant, hilarious, maddening, and impossible to love, all at the exact same time. The end came as expected. United won the FA Cup in May 2016, a rare bright spot sealed by Jesse Lingard's extra time strike, soon after Alan Pardew's touchline dance moves. Van Gaal lifted the trophy, smiled awkwardly, and within 48 hours he was gone. The club announced his sacking as reports of Jose Mourinho's arrival dominated the headlines. Looking back, Van Gaal's time at United is difficult to define. He did stabilise the chaos left by Moyes, and he did bring back European football, but at the cost of creativity, pace, and honestly, joy. His football suffocated the club. His philosophy, built on control, left United looking robotic and lifeless. The FA Cup was his final gift, and it was a good one, a reminder that even at their lowest, United could still win. But it also marked the end of another failed era, another full stop, another chapter in Manchester United's decade in the wilderness. Years later, Van Gaal spoke candidly about his time at Manchester United, citing recruitment as a major reason for his team's struggles. He criticised Woodward, stating, "I had to resort to number 7 or 8 of my wish list, players for which I knew we overpaid, but I was judged and evaluated on those players." When Jose Mourinho arrived at Manchester United in the summer of 2016, it felt like the club had finally given in to inevitability. His appointment had been flirted with for years. The self-proclaimed special one was meant to restore order, discipline, and above all, winning. After 3 years of searching for identity, United were ready for a manager who did not need to find himself. Mourinho knew exactly who he was. The club rolled out the red carpet. His unveiling was treated like the coronation of a monarch. His press conference was staged and sharp as he declared Manchester United a giant club that belongs with the best managers. It was vintage Mourinho, a soundbite that promised both glory and theatre, and early on, he delivered on both fronts. His transfer business set the tone. Paul Pogba returned for a world record fee, the kind of statement signing fans have been screaming for. Zlatan Ibrahimovic followed, bringing charisma and experience. Eric Bailly and Henrik Mkhitaryan arrived too, giving Mourinho the muscle and flair he craved. United, once again, were building like a heavyweight. Considering the moves Van Gaal made only a year before, this felt like confirmation from the United hierarchy. Jose was being backed. For a while, it worked. United began the season with purpose, winning their first 3 league games and beating Leicester 2-1 in the Community Shield. Zlatan's presence gave them a focal point. Pogba brought swagger back to the midfield, and for a fleeting moment, Old Trafford believed. Mourinho spoke about challenging for the title. His tone was serious, his body language assured. After years of drift, Manchester United looked like Manchester United again. Mourinho had managed to stop the losses, but at the cost of losing out on wins. From October to April, United only lost once, but 14 draws in that time made it impossible to get any forward momentum up the table. They started that run in 6th. They finished it in 5th. Despite losing less than City, Liverpool and Arsenal, United finished 6th, way below the early season suggestions Jose had laid out at his unveiling. 15 draws at the league, 10 at Old Trafford. These aren't the figures that you win the league with, and Mourinho promised silverware. And by the end of May, however, he delivered it, twice. United lifted the League Cup and the Europa League, securing Champions League qualification and their first European trophy since 2008. The Europa League final against Ajax was scrappy and joyless, but Mourinho did not care. Poets don't win many trophies, he said, with a hint of pride. For him, this was proof that his method still worked. Winning was winning, no matter how it looked. The 2017-18 season began with even greater expectation. United backed him again in the market, signing Romelu Lukaku, Nemanja Matic, and Victor Lindelof. The squad looked balanced, confident, and physical. Zlatan departed, Wayne Rooney too, but Mourinho's United seemed ready to move forward. They started the campaign brightly, scoring freely, looking sharp, and more dynamic on the break. Lukaku thrived early on, feeding off the energy of Martial and Rashford. Yet even in those moments of promise, there was always a ceiling. Mourinho's football was efficient, but rarely expressive. United's most impressive wins, like the 3-1 at Arsenal where De Gea made a record number of saves, or the 3-2 comeback at the Etihad where Pogba ran riot, came from moments of chaos rather than control. They were reactive performances, flashes of brilliance in a system that often looked afraid to breathe. United finished 2nd that season, 19 points behind Manchester City. Mourinho called it one of the best achievements of my career, a line that was both revealing and defensive. It was not arrogance, it was exasperation. He knew the gap to City was not just in quality, but in vision. City were modern, United were archaic. He wanted reinforcements, faster defenders, more power. The board, however, refused. The relationship began to sour. The 2018-19 season marked the breaking point. Pre-season was chaotic. Mourinho publicly criticised his players, the club, and even his own transfer department. After finishing 2nd, United needed a push from the higher-ups to close the gap to City and challenge. Jose was given Fred, Diego Dallo, and Lee Grant. He warned that the coming campaign would be very difficult without the signings he wanted. By October, his assessment was coming true. United was sluggish, disjointed, and already adrift in the table. As with any Jose Mourinho tenure, there were box office moments. The late comeback against Newcastle, Mourinho's emotional roar at full time, the clenched fist towards the Stretford end. It was classic Jose, theatre and fury intertwined. But the energy did not last. The players looked drained. His relationships with Pogba, Martial and Shaw deteriorated publicly. The dressing room, once united by fear and focus, grew fractured and tired of his constant criticism. The 3-1 defeat at Anfield in December 2018 was the final act. Liverpool dominated, United were lifeless, and the symbolism was impossible to ignore. One club had found a manager who brought belief, identity, and modernity. The other had one clinging to control and memory. Mourinho was dismissed 2 days later. He left with 3 trophies, a 2nd place finish, and a war zone in his wake. In truth, Mourinho's time at Old Trafford was both a success and a failure. He restored a sense of competitiveness, but not of progress. His reign was filled with grit and conflict, moments of glory buried under the weight of constant confrontation. Looking back, it is hard not to wonder what would have happened if he had been appointed in 2013, when Ferguson first stepped aside. The infrastructure then was stronger, the authority clearer, and Mourinho's methods might have found a home. Instead, he arrived at a club without direction, run by executives who mistook nostalgia for strategy. Mourinho may have been the right man at the wrong time. He left Old Trafford like he left so many jobs in his career, exhausted, vindicated, and convinced the world would one day see his point of view. For a moment, he made United matter again, but as the years that followed showed, relevance is not the same as revival. The club's letter of dismissal regarding Jose was brutal, stating that there was no progress in results or style. In the same letter, the club declared the next manager would understand the philosophy of the club, including their attacking traditions. Few have predicted that Jose's replacement would be the man who scored one of the most famous goals in the club's history. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer arrived not as a long-term solution, but as a caretaker, a familiar face brought in to steady the ship. His task was to bring a sense of joy, something that had been missing for far too long. And at first, he did exactly that. Solskjaer was everything Mourinho was not. He smiled, he talked about attacking football, about the Manchester United DNA. He spoke of belief, of the privilege of representing the badge, and of the need to play with freedom and courage. The contrast was immediate. The players looked liberated, the fans reconnected. Old Trafford began to feel alive again. The early results were staggering. 5 goals at Cardiff, 3 at Huddersfield, 4 against Bournemouth. In that same run, Ole led United to wins over Newcastle, Tottenham and Brighton. Paul Pogba rediscovered the form that had convinced United to break the transfer record for him. Marcus Rashford was reborn as a striker. United were counter-attacking with pace and conviction, pressing high and playing with intent. For a few months, it really did feel like the old United had returned. And then came Paris, the Champions League round of 16 against Neymar's PSG. Down 2-0 from the first leg at Old Trafford, Solskjaer's side arrived in France with little expectation. But football has a way of reviving old magic. 2 first-half goals from Romelu Lukaku gave United belief, and when VAR awarded a late penalty for handball, Rashford stepped up to complete the miracle.
Oh, he smashed it in! What a penalty from Marcus Rashford!
Pandemonium. United had done the impossible. Solskjaer's name echoed through the Parc des Princes. It felt like destiny. Within days, the interim tag was gone. Ole was now the permanent Manchester United manager. Unfortunately, football can be cruel. Once the euphoria faded, the cracks began to show. United's fitness dipped, performances regressed, and the squad's limitations became clear. They lost 8 of their final 12 games that season, limping to a 6th place finish. Still, fans clung to hope. Ole had brought back belief, and for a while, that was enough. If Solskjaer's first few months in charge were a dream, the 2019-20 campaign was a sobering test of whether it could be sustained. The summer brought a change in transfer strategy, with United moving away from marquee signings toward younger, hungrier players. Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Daniel James arrived, followed by the record-breaking purchase of Harry Maguire from Leicester City. It was a step toward rebuilding a squad that had long felt fractured and unbalanced. From the jump, United showed the style Ole wanted, fast and direct counter-attacking football. However, they struggled with consistency. United finished their first 10 games with 3 wins, 4 draws and 3 losses, and this unpredictable form continued all the way into January. It was during this difficult stretch, however, that his emphasis on youth and energy began to take shape. Marcus Rashford grew into a leader on the pitch, producing the best football of his career before injury struck in January. Anthony Martial returned to his favoured central position, rediscovered his scoring touch. But it was the January signing of Bruno Fernandes that transformed the team's outlook entirely. The Portuguese midfielder arrived from Sporting Lisbon and instantly brought invention and personality to a side that had grown predictable. His goals and assists galvanised United's attack, and his confidence seemed to lift everyone around him. From the moment Fernandes joined, United's play regained purpose. The tempo quickened, the pressing sharpened, and belief returned to Old Trafford. After the COVID-19 pandemic interrupted the season, United came back looking revitalised. The enforced break allowed Rashford and Pogba to recover from injury, and the team hit form immediately after the restart. Fernandes, Pogba and Martial formed a fluid attacking core that dismantled opponents throughout their summer run-in. United went unbeaten in their final 14 league matches, surging from mid-table obscurity to secure 3rd place and Champions League qualification. There were still moments that underlined how far the club had to go. United fell short in all 3 semi-finals they reached: the FA Cup, the EFL Cup and the Europa League, each one a reminder that the rebuild was incomplete. Yet for the first time in years, possibly since Sir Alex Ferguson left the club, there was a sense of direction. Solskjaer had reconnected the team with its supporters and created a foundation of youth, energy and belief. It was not the finished product, far from it, but it finally felt like progress. The beginning of the 2021 season showed similarities to that of the 18-19 season under Jose, most notably the summer's transfer window. Much like Mourinho's final season, United's squad looked ready to take the next step up the table, and financial backing was imperative. However, unlike Mourinho, when Ole was given only Donny van de Beek, Alex Telles, a 33-year-old Edinson Cavani, and Amad Diallo, who had only played 4 league games before his £40 million move, he didn't complain. The season began awkwardly. United had little pre-season and looked off the pace. A humiliating 6-1 defeat at home to Tottenham exposed all the old flaws. The defence looked uncertain, the midfield lacked control, and confidence threatened to unravel before the campaign had truly begun. Yet, as they so often did under Solskjaer, United responded when written off. A 13-game unbeaten run in the league, alongside big wins against PSG and Red Bull Leipzig in the Champions League, had the mood around the stadium lifted again. But for how long this time? Bruno Fernandes continued to carry United creatively and emotionally. His goals, assists, and relentless desire to win became the heartbeat of the side. Rashford built on his form from the previous season, combining productivity with leadership on and off the pitch. Behind them, Luke Shaw enjoyed the best football of his career, finally becoming the all-round fullback United had long hoped for. Solskjaer's United were not always polished, but they were resilient, capable of turning games in an instant through sheer determination. One of the defining traits of the season was their remarkable away form. United went the entire Premier League campaign unbeaten away from home, a record built on counter-attacking precision and mental toughness. Time and time again, they came from behind to win, reflecting both their spirit and their flaws. They finished second in the league behind Manchester City, their highest position since Ferguson retired. And for the first time in years, there was genuine talk of a title challenge returning in the near future. Yet, for all the progress, frustrations lingered. United's Champions League campaign ended abruptly in the group stage after a poor run of results in December. And as the season drew to a close, the team faltered in key moments. The Europa League final against Villarreal encapsulated Solskjaer's reign, encouraging in theory, just short of greatness in practice. A tense 1-1 draw went to penalties, and when David De Gea's miss sealed defeat, it marked another painful near miss. Still, it was impossible to deny that Solskjaer had restored a sense of pride and identity. United had rediscovered their ability to compete, and Old Trafford once again believed in its manager. The connection between the squad and supporters was the strongest it had been in years. The challenge now was to take the final step from contenders to champions. For Solskjaer and for United, the next leap would prove the hardest of all. Amidst this season, animosity towards the big clubs around Europe grew, as in April of 2021, the European Super League was announced. Here came immediate backlash. Fan, governments, FIFA, and national leagues alike all rose up in anger to protest the creation of this new competition, citing that it was nothing more than a cash grab and that it was elitist while showing no route to promotion for other clubs in the world. With all the outrage and protests surrounding this new league, many clubs, including United, pulled out less than a week after its announcement. For Woodward, this was the end of his time at United. The Glazers and he had been big supporters of the project and believed it would be a good move for United. Some would say this was a great example of Woodward's shining flaw. He was too concerned about how United were doing financially, rather than how they were doing on the pitch. His background was in investment banking, and his previous role at United was about negotiating lucrative sponsorships for the club and increasing revenue. These just weren't applicable to how football is run. This isn't Moneyball. Less than a week after the original announcement of the Super League and a few hours before their own withdrawal announcement, United posted a statement that Ed Woodward was to leave the club at the end of the year. The 21-22 season was supposed to be the one where everything finally clicked together. After finishing second the year before, Solskjaer had been backed like never before. Jadon Sancho arrived after a year of pursuit, Rafael Varane brought the pedigree of a serial winner, and Cristiano Ronaldo's dramatic return felt like the final piece in United's long-awaited resurgence. The mood around Old Trafford in August was electric. The early weeks offered flashes of promise. A 5-1 win over Leeds opened the season in thrilling fashion, and Ronaldo's brace on his return against Newcastle rekindled old memories. For a moment, it felt as though the Ferguson years might finally have a worthy successor, but beneath the surface, the same issues began to appear. The balance of the team faltered. Ronaldo's arrival changed the rhythm of United's attack, and Solskjaer struggled to fit all his stars into a cohesive system. By October, optimism had already turned to unease. Heavy defeats to Liverpool and Leicester exposed deep flaws in structure and mentality. The 5-0 loss to Liverpool at Old Trafford was a humiliation that cut through the heart of the fanbase. The following weeks brought only more pain, including a 2-0 defeat to Man City that underlined the gulf between United and the top sides once again. Solskjaer's calm demeanour, once his greatest strength, now looked like quiet resignation, and the end came in November. After 5 losses in 7 games, a calamitous 4-1 loss to Watford was Ole's final nail in the coffin. It felt both sudden and inevitable. Solskjaer left with dignity, holding back tears in his farewell interview. He had steadied a sinking ship and restored pride during his tenure, but in the end, sentiment could only take him so far. United needed more than nostalgia. In hindsight, Solskjaer's tenure feels like the most human of United's post-Ferguson eras. He was not a tactical genius, but he gave fans something they had been missing: hope, connection, and fleeting glimpses of what Manchester United used to be. His reign was defined by emotion more than evolution, by memories rather than milestones. And as he left, there was sadness rather than anger, because for a while, he really made people believe again. Ole wasn't the only one to make his departure, with Ed Woodward announcing previously in April 2021 that he would be leaving his role with United at the end of the year, making this a fresh opportunity for there to be some unity on both fronts. Often it felt like United had made transfer choices before consulting the manager, and the lack of harmony had often taken its toll on the squad and dressing room morale. United finally had a chance to right the ship. Michael Carrick took charge as caretaker while they searched for a successor. A caretaker for the caretaker, it would turn out. His spell lasted only 3 matches, but he did oversee a 2-0 win away to Villarreal that secured United's qualification for the Champions League knockouts, and a hard-fought draw at Stamford Bridge, and ended with a win against Arsenal at Old Trafford. Short but sweet. Carrick quietly stepped away after that victory, a rare act of dignity in an era defined by turmoil. Then came Ralf Rangnick. The club presented his arrival as the beginning of something smarter, more structured, more modern. Rangnick was introduced as the godfather of the pressing game, a visionary who had influenced Jurgen Klopp and Thomas Tuchel. United fans were told that he would lay the foundations for a more sustainable future before moving upstairs into a consultancy role. It sounded ideal, but in truth the club never truly knew what they wanted from him. His opening match, a 1-0 win against Crystal Palace, took everyone by surprise. United pressed higher, looked sharper, and Fred even scored a curling winner that felt like a small miracle. It was the first time in months the team looked as though they had a plan. But that promise faded quickly. The pressing vanished, the intensity disappeared. The players, many of whom had grown used to reactive football under Solskjaer, looked exhausted and uncertain about what was being asked of them. Rangnick's philosophy required full commitment and fitness. United's squad had neither. Training sessions were said to be repetitive and confusing. Senior players openly questioned the methods. Some sources claimed that a group of players wanted the club to appoint a proper manager rather than an interim. It was the same story that had played out under every manager since Ferguson left. Division, leaks, and a dressing room that seemed to turn on itself when things got difficult. The results soon mirrored the mood. A draw against Newcastle, where United were outrun and outfought by a team in the relegation zone. A lifeless defeat at home to Wolves, where João Moutinho's late strike silenced Old Trafford. In February, they were knocked out of the FA Cup by Middlesbrough on penalties, after missing countless chances. Every setback chipped away at what little belief was left. Cristiano Ronaldo, signed months earlier as a supposed catalyst for glory, became an awkward symbol of wider dysfunction. He still delivered moments of brilliance, scoring late winners and vital goals, but his presence forced United into playing in a way that contradicted everything Rangnick wanted to implement. The pressing game was incompatible with a 37-year-old who could not lead from the front. What followed were a series of disjointed performances that underlined how little chemistry existed in this team. United managed a narrow draw against Atletico Madrid in the Champions League round of 16 first leg that had fans hoping, but the return leg ended in another meek exit. United were eliminated in front of their own fans with barely a fight. Atletico were cynical, composed, and in control. United were the opposite. Rangnick admitted after the game that United lacked intensity and structure, 2 words that summed up his entire tenure. As the season dragged on, the atmosphere grew heavier. Players looked disinterested. Harry Maguire was even booed by sections of England support during the international break, and his confidence seemed to evaporate completely. The midfield remained a glaring weakness, with Fred and McTominay unable to provide balance, while Pogba drifted towards the exit door once again. The 4-0 loss at Brighton was a new low, a humiliation in every sense. Brighton ran harder, pressed better, and celebrated every goal as if they were exposing a fraud. Rangnick stood motionless on the touchline. He had warned the club months earlier that it needed open heart surgery. Not a quick fix, but a complete rebuild. It was an honest assessment, but a damning one. United had spent hundreds of millions, hired manager after manager after manager, yet were no closer to resembling a coherent football team. The board did not seem to want to hear it. By the time the season ended, Rangnick's consultancy role had quietly disappeared, his future swept away as the Erik ten Hag era prepared to begin. United finished 6th, with 58 points, their lowest tally in Premier League history. They scored fewer goals than Leicester and conceded as many as Burnley. It was dismal, pathetic, and outright sad for a club of Manchester United's size. Rangnick arrived as the man who had modernised Manchester United, but he left just another footnote in a decade of failure. His ideas were never truly embraced, his authority never truly respected, and his words never truly acted upon. The club that once prided itself on vision had become one of short-term stints. Carrick's brief steadiness, Solskjaer's sentiment, and Rangnick's truth-telling each came and went with the same result. A broken structure that swallowed good intentions and spat out disappointment. And so came Erik ten Hag. Another new beginning, another promise of restoration, and another chance to rebuild the ruins that Ferguson left behind. Erik ten Hag's arrival brought something different. For the first time since Sir Alex Ferguson retired, Manchester United appointed the man the fans truly wanted. Calm, intelligent, and tactically assured, Ten Hag came with a reputation for discipline and structure. He had taken Ajax to a Champions League semi-final, playing brave, attacking football built on control. United supporters hoped that the same clarity would finally return to Old Trafford. As with most Manchester United managers at one point, Ten Hag was backed financially. Over 200 million was spent on incoming players, but some argued it was money badly spent. Tyrell Malacia for 13 million seemed like solid business, as did Christian Eriksen on a free transfer, but their three main signings were controversial. Casemiro joined from Real Madrid for 60 million. No one questioned the Brazilian's career, but at 30 years old leaving the Bernabeu, fans wondered if he was there for one final paycheck. Ten Hag also brought in Antony and Lisandro Martinez from his time at Ajax. Martinez, while solid, was put into question as to whether his height would prove too consequential in the physical English game. Antony was, frankly, just confusing. 80 million on a player who didn't particularly light up the Eredivisie and will now fight for minutes with Jadon Sancho on the right wing. The start was disastrous. A home defeat to Brighton was followed by humiliation at Brentford, where United conceded 4 times in the first 35 minutes. Ten Hag made the players run the same distance Brentford had outrun them by the next day in training. It was his way of setting a standard. That moment set the tone for the season ahead. The response came in the form of defiance. A 2-1 victory over Liverpool under the Old Trafford lights reignited belief and marked the true beginning of the Ten Hag era. He benched Cristiano Ronaldo and Harry Maguire soon after, confirming that no one was untouchable. Manchester United had a manager who would not bend to reputation or ego. Results began to follow. Ten Hag rebuilt confidence through control. Casemiro added authority in midfield, Lisandro Martinez brought aggression and calmness at the back, and Christian Eriksen quietly stitched the team together. Marcus Rashford rediscovered himself, scoring with the confidence of a player finally enjoying football again. The turnaround was remarkable. United went from embarrassment to genuine contention for silverware. In February, they defeated Newcastle at Wembley to win the League Cup, ending a 6-year wait for a trophy. Casemiro and Rashford both scored, while David De Gea surpassed Peter Schmeichel's clean sheet record. The celebrations that followed felt like a release, a reminder that winning still mattered at Old Trafford. Ten Hag also guided the club to 3rd in the Premier League, securing a return to the Champions League. There were setbacks along the way, including a 6-3 defeat to Manchester City and a disgusting 7-0 loss to Liverpool, but the response to each was what stood out most. United began to recover from adversity quickly. The mentality was changing. The season ended with defeat in the FA Cup final to Manchester City, but by then, United's progress was undeniable. Ten Hag had restored order, belief, and standards. He handled egos, rebuilt the squad spirit, and demanded that the team play with purpose. It was not a perfect season, but it was the most coherent one in years. Manchester United finally looked like a club with a plan. However, as we've seen so many times already, United struggled to take that extra step after a promising, progressive campaign. Expectations were high. Fans had wanted Ten Hag more than anyone else, believing he could finally restore some order and belief to Old Trafford. With Mason Mount, Rasmus Højlund and Andre Onana joining, Ten Hag was once more supported heavily by the board. More so than most managers before him, he needed results. As seen so many times before, United remained inconsistent. The first half of the 23-24 season saw United with 10 wins, 9 losses and 1 draw. After the financial support from the board and the backing of the fans, this was nowhere near good enough for the Dutchman. United's attempt to play out from the back often looked chaotic rather than composed. The defensive injuries also piled up, with Martinez, Varane, Shaw and Malacia all missing long stretches. In attack, Antony struggled for consistency, or maybe in truth, was just consistently bad, and Rashford's fine form faded. Ten Hag refused to compromise his ideas, and that stubbornness became a point of tension. United still produced flashes of quality, including an emotional FA Cup run that culminated in a final win over Manchester City. Alejandro Garnacho's full breakout year brought hope for the future, while Kobbie Mainoo's rise from the academy added freshness and control in midfield. Yet beneath the silverware and emotion, there was growing uncertainty. United finished 8th in the Premier League, their lowest in decades, even lower than David Moyes managed, and crashed out of the Champions League in the group stages after a series of chaotic, error-strewn performances. The football had become unrecognisable from the sharp, disciplined style of Ten Hag's earlier months. United's play was open, erratic and reactive. There were reports of players questioning the methods behind the scenes, and by the end of the campaign, even with an FA Cup in hand, the manager's position was under intense scrutiny. The Dutch manager also faced off-field challenges. Early in the season, the Sancho saga erupted. Jadon Sancho, sidelined due to alleged poor training, publicly denied Ten Hag's claims, calling them untrue and claiming he'd been made a scapegoat. The standoff culminated in Sancho spending half the season on loan back at Borussia Dortmund, leaving Ten Hag to navigate media scrutiny and fan frustration. In arguably bigger news, December of 2023 saw confirmation that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his company Ineos had purchased a 25% stake in Manchester United. It was sold as the dawn of a new Manchester United. After years of mismanagement and fan unrest under the Glazers, Ratcliffe's arrival brought a promise of football competence and structure. Ineos would take control of sporting operations, with Ratcliffe describing his aim to restore the club to the top of world football. It was a message that resonated deeply with supporters who had grown tired of watching rivals surge ahead. There was talk of modernising Carrington, rebuilding Old Trafford, and instilling a clear identity throughout the organisation. For the first time in years, there was belief that United finally had adults in the room. But the reality of 2024 painted a much bleaker picture. The structure that was meant to bring clarity only created confusion. Ineos quickly found themselves mired in bureaucracy, with Ratcliffe's partial control clashing against the Glazers' lingering presence. Sporting director Dan Ashworth became a symbol of the chaos. After months of negotiations and legal wrangling to release him from Newcastle, he arrived only to be dismissed himself within half a year, costing the club millions. Technical director Jason Wilcox was hired with a mandate to reform recruitment, but that too became entangled in internal disagreement. Decisions on player sales and scouting were delayed for months, while the team continued to flounder on the pitch. The 24-25 season began under a heavy cloud. Despite murmurings of Ten Hag being removed from post, Ineos offered the Dutchman a new contract at the start of July, publicly showing their support. They also gave him nearly £200 million for a new cohort of players. Again, however, the recruitment had no real rhyme or reason. Eleni Yoro, while a talented young defender, was thrown into the deep end of a team that needed much more than the next generation. Manuel Ugarte and Matthijs de Ligt joined from PSG and Bayern Munich respectively, but neither left their previous clubs with a glowing recommendation. Finally, after a season of fans requesting a star striker to aid Højlund up top, question marks were raised when nearly £40 million was spent on Joshua Zirkzee, who had only netted 14 times for his previous team, Bologna. Ineos had backed Ten Hag financially, and so it proved all the more harrowing when they announced over 250 members of staff would be made redundant to slash costs across the club, with another 150 planned for early 2025. On the pitch, the team reflected the state of the club. A narrow win over Fulham on the opening day gave false hope, but defeats soon followed against Brighton and Liverpool, the latter a sobering 3-0 loss at Old Trafford that underlined how far United had fallen behind their great rivals. The football was cautious and lifeless. Ten Hag's message no longer landed with the players, and his selections often felt desperate rather than deliberate. By early October, United had endured their worst start to a season since 1989, and reports of dressing room discontent became impossible to ignore. The defeat to West Ham, settled by a late penalty, proved the final blow. On 28th of October 2024, Ten Hag was dismissed. The end seemed obvious to everyone except Ineos. Only 3 months after offering him a brand new deal, after backing him with a war chest in the summer, amidst making everyday people at the club redundant, the decision to then remove Ten Hag at an inflated cost seemed at the very least bizarre and at most out of touch. The club was stuck in the same doom loop it had been since Ferguson's departure, a cycle of rebuilds, resets and restarts. Ruud van Nistelrooy briefly took the reins, a familiar face offering calm amid the noise, but his role was only ever a stopgap. A few weeks later, United turned to Ruben Amorim, the young coach from Portugal who had built his name on discipline and daring football. His appointment felt like yet another chance to turn the page, though the story had started to feel painfully familiar. Amorim's time at Manchester United began with unrest and desperation. The club had turned to one of Europe's brightest young coaches, a man who was celebrated for his innovation at Sporting Lisbon, yet there was a feeling amongst the fans that all of this was redundant, that the issues stemming from the club came right from the very top. Amorim's tactical intelligence and calm personality offered something different to the chaos that had consumed United for a decade, but within months, the promise of a new beginning gave way to a grim realization. Amorim's 3-4-3 system, so effective in Portugal, looked awkward in England. United struggled to build play, midfielders were isolated, and the defensive line was constantly exposed. Every match felt like a test the players were not prepared to take. The squad was simply not built for this, but Amorim was determined they'd play his way or they'd fail trying. And fail they did. On paper, it stands as one of the bleakest seasons in the club's history. 15th in the Premier League, 42 points, 18 defeats. Those numbers alone would have been unthinkable for Manchester United, but watching them unfold in real time made it even worse. The performances were flat and the results were lifeless. By the final months, Amorim was visibly worn down. His press conferences became increasingly introspective. He admitted the team lacked the physical and tactical profile needed to compete at this level demanded. "We are maybe the worst team in the history of Manchester United," he confessed in January. A line that summed up the despair of the season, and not exactly a rallying cry. Still, United did make their way to the Europa League final, coincidentally against Tottenham Hotspur and Ange Postecoglou, one of only 5 teams who finished lower than them in the league. The game was labelled as a game of 2 managers, but one story. Surely the victor keeps his job, whilst the other moves on to pastures new. United lost 1-0, yet it was Ange Postecoglou who was removed from his post. Ineos believed all Amorim needed was more time. Many pointed to him as the latest casualty of a broken cycle. The turnover of managers, the uneven recruitment, and the lack of board clarity had created created an environment where even talented coaches struggled to succeed. Amorim's shortcomings were real, but they were amplified by the chaos surrounding him. When the final whistle blew on the last day of the season, there was no anger left, just exhaustion. The supporters had endured a decade of failed rebuilds, and this felt like the lowest ebb yet. For a generation that grew up watching title races, seeing their club limp to 15th felt surreal. The famous badge still carried global weight, but on the pitch, it no longer commanded fear or respect. Since finishing this script, the Ruben Amorim era has come to a swift end, with the coach's departure being announced following a 1-1 draw with Leeds. However, the result itself barely played a part. In a frankly bizarre post-match conference, Amorim seemed to hint at the challenges from the board on a number of issues, including transfers and system. When asked to clarify his comments, he said, "I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United." That is clear. He went on to suggest that because he wasn't a big name like Tuchel, Conte or Mourinho, that he wasn't given the same trust within the transfer market. This song and dance was one United fans were all too familiar with Mourinho and Van Gaal both making similar comments during their tenures regarding a lack of trust and autonomy. The real issue was that this was meant to be a thing of the past. When Ineos had bought the club, there was a belief that they would be different and that managers would be trusted to make their own decisions. Instead, they've been as disjointed as the Glazers. United are now back to square one. With their elimination in both the League Cup and FA Cup coming in the first round, they will only play 40 matches this year, their lowest number in 44 years, another unwelcome record. And Michael Carrick has been announced as interim until the end of the season, with a view to appoint a new permanent manager before the summer and start off next season on a new slate. It's a story we've heard so many times before. The question is, will it make the right choice, or will it simply be another year spent in the wilderness?